Herbert Hoover was born on 10 August 1874 in West Branch, Iowa. That's right. We are moving. Actually, you know what I was going to say? We're moving out of the Midwest, but not quite. We're moving out of the Ohio, Indiana region. So we
Yeah.
got to give a shout out to other Midwestern presidents. So he was born in West Branch, Iowa, to a religious Quaker family. I think this is our first Quaker, if not the first Quaker president we've had, the first Quaker president we've had on this show.
Sure.
His father was a blacksmith, and tragically, by the time he was 9, both of his parents had died.
Oh shit! Wow.
Yeah, it was the 19th century. As we've established with all of our presidents who got sick in the 19th century, you got sick, you died. It was just it.
Apparently.
So after his parents both died at age 9, he wound up moving to Oregon with his uncle. Was a relatively unextraordinary student to all of the sources I've read, but an extremely hardworking and adventurous young lad. Now, he attended the first class of students ever at Stanford University. And from what I read, I mean, it was his aspiration to attend Stanford. So even before it was an accredited school, it was still like the standard bearer for West Coast colleges. I love that about this. It was like, I need to get into my dream school, Stanford, the one that's still under construction.
I mean,
it's my dream school.
It's going places.
He majored in geology, which is notable. I mean, I was always under the impression that our presidents usually majored in law. So we got a science nerd as president. And he met another Iowa-based science nerd while he was there, Lou Henry, who would go on to become first lady. So it's notable. He found the only other person in his class at Stanford who was from Iowa, who was also a female. So naturally, he married her.
I mean, you gotta lock it down, man. I get it.
I mean, I imagine there that poor lady had a lot of annoying college suitors.
Oh yeah.
It's like, man, I want to find a girl who loves rocks as much as I. There's one.
Yeah, only one.
And by the way, I encourage everyone to read up on Lou Henry Hoover because she was a fascinating character, and we're only gonna get the tip of the iceberg on this story. So read up on her. Extremely interesting woman. So after they both graduated from Stanford University, which again, they were like first class to graduate, so they were probably really insufferable about it.
Mm-hmm.
As most people who graduate from Stanford are insufferable now.
I mean, they are better than we are. So
they are. I mean, they got into a better college than all of us.
100%.
So afterwards, there was the standard laboring in gold mines in California.
Oh.
You know, it's a great post-college job.
Oh.
Laboring in gold mines,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually got promoted to being an inspector and evaluator for mines all around North America. Then, in order to find work, he moved to Australia in 1897.
That's awesome.
To work as a mining engineer. And then in China in 1899, he brought his new wife, Lou, as we've talked about before. Now, in 1900, a year after they had moved to China, the Boxer Rebellion happened. And if you're thinking, what is the Boxer Rebellion? You were thinking the same thing I thought, I think yesterday when I decided to Google it. Well, Herbert Hoover was in China, and as far as I know, not a vampire, possibly a ghost. And while in the Boxer Rebellion, in a bluff nutshell, because that's all I got for you folks, is that there were a lot of non-Chinese countries exploiting China and their resources, and the Chinese people weren't particularly happy about that, so they sought to remove all foreigners from the country that were, setting up shop. So, as you probably guessed, Herbert Hoover, born in Iowa, American. He helped set up a barricade to protect the Americans, took up arms to defend them. And Lou served as a nurse and also learned how to shoot a gun while she was there.
Hey.
So she learned to defend them. So
that's quite a lady.
Herbert and Lou really kind of got their hands dirty, besides the whole laboring in mines thing, in terms of international politics while they were in China for the Boxer Rebellion. But Herbert Hoover's life, it was so exciting, and it's a shame.
Sounds awesome.
History threw him under the bus to be like, he's the Great Depression president. It's like, yeah, but this dude lived like any given decade of this man's life is more accomplished than any of us will do in a lifetime. So one thing I love about the fact that they lived in China is Lou spoke 8 languages fluently.
Holy smokes.
One of those languages she spoke fluently was Mandarin. And when Lou and Herbert wanted to have sidebar conversations in the White House, they would do so in Mandarin so no one could hear them.
That's cool.
I love that about these two. I would imagine just sort of like being in the Oval Office and the president and first lady just start having an argument in Mandarin. It's just like, oh, who's at fault here? I can't even take tabs.
Oh, if that happened today and there was, that wouldn't look good.
They're spies.
Yeah. Yeah. like
it's the Manchurian Candidate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Literally.
We know they're not spies, but let's be honest, people would take it the wrong way.
But I mean, you know, in the early 20th century, I think it'd be kind of cool.
I mean, yeah. It would totally be cool then, and like these really well educated, like globe trotting, like they fighting together in the trenches, and she's a nurse and she's shooting people and he's fighting, and like just the guy, he sounds awesome. Like he's Indiana Jones.
We just got to their post-collegiate lives.
Yeah.
Like, there's still so much more to go.
Yeah.
All right. So this incident did not discourage him from his dream of being a mining engineer. So they continued going around the world, making a name for himself. In the process, they both become extremely wealthy, millionaires, and they're living a nice high life. And then a really big event happens. Have you heard of World War One?
In passing.
It is a casual incident. But even before America got involved in World War One, so the Hoovers are this super rich family at a time when, you know, there weren't that many rich families in the world.
Sure.
So Herbert organized the evacuation of 120,000 Americans from Europe as the war was breaking out. That is just the start, folks. All right, this guy was like an unsung hero on the civilian sector of World War One.
Wow.
He organized the Committee for the Relief of Belgium, who had been decimated by the Germans, raised millions of dollars for food and medicine for the Belgians. The whole time, he is obviously impressing everyone because it's like, wow, is there a millionaire out there who's like a real humanitarian? Yes.
Apparently.
And he went to Stanford, so he's pretty cool. So
he's just showing off at this point.
Woodrow Wilson, who was president during World War One, took note of this and asked him to take charge of the U.S. Food Administration. And so it was his job to supervise rationing of food and supplies that would need to be sent overseas. So little things I discovered was meatless Mondays and wheatless Wednesdays. So after the war, Woodrow Wilson, who was a Democratic president, Herbert Hoover was a Republican. So again, this is encouraging because it's like people are crossing partisan lines to make the world a better place.
During up to that time, which was the greatest humanitarian crisis post-war of history, right? Up to that time.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The war to end all wars. I just assume they all talked like this. After the war, Wilson hired Hoover to head the European Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, which channeled 34 million tons of food, clothing, and supply for 20 separate nations.
Dang.
All right. What's really notable about that was he had some unpopular dissenters saying, why are you going to feed the Bolsheviks? And he had this great quote, 20 million people are starving. Whatever their politics, they shall be fed. Bam.
I love it.
This man is a boss. And he saved millions of lives.
Yeah.
You ask any person to include probably both of us last week, what do you think of Herbert Hoover? He's the asshole who tanked the economy. The Great Depression is on his shoulders. And it's like he also saved millions of people in war-torn Europe.
Oh, he's only known for Hooverville.
Yeah.
That sucks. This guy's
and
awesome.
Let's not forget the damn.
Oh, yeah.
All right. This is why I love this show, folks.
Yeah.
Because this is us learning just what's below the surface of the water for these people that are. I mean, we've also learned that some people from history were really racist and awful, but we also learned that some of them were kind of badass.
Yeah.
So after World War One, he continued to get involved in politics. He was one of the most prominent Republicans to support Woodrow Wilson's initiative to join the League of Nations, precursor to United Nations, that did not really stick, and lost the bid for the Republican nomination, probably due to his support of the League of Nations in 1920. We've already talked about who won the 1920 election, and it's our boy Jerry Warren G. Harding.
It's getting sexy.
Oh yeah. Oh, but by the way, Herbert Hoover's legacy is like sexy and sort of an Raiders of the Lost Ark sort of way. I imagine Lou is sort of being the Marion Ravenwood here.
Yeah.
But thankfully for, I don't know, Herbert Hoover's legacy, it's not sexy in the Warren G. Harding way, which is a lot more Mad Men, y'all. A lot more sexual harassment going on.
So, given his like Indiana Jones lifestyle, her saying, yeah, that guy makes a lot of sense because he's got to really stand out. And turns out he was like James Bond. Like, he's just awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, again, I'm picturing these two as like, it's a great duo because, I mean, at the same time that it was like, it made sense for her to pick him. It made sense for him to pick her. I mean, because like, again, you know, she's up there in China during the Boxer Rebellion.
Sure.
Armed with weapons, speaking 8 languages fluently.
Yeah.
Being able to identify different rock elevations.
Yeah.
That's all sexy to me. So you know what? You can go to hell, Warren G. Harding. We got a new sexiest episode.
They those two makes a lot of sense together. Like, they're like,
it's a good power couple.
Why hasn't the movie been made?
Exactly. Probably because everyone's like, well, that's the Great Depression president. And we're just at the 19-teens by now. We touched a little bit upon the 1920s. So actually, this is the second time in our show's history we have talked about Herbert Hoover. And the last time we did, we had high praise for him. It was during the Harding episode, because Warren G. Harding's legacy is his adventurous penis, and also the fact that he had the most famously crooked cabinet in American history. It seems like every single member of his cabinet, with a few exceptions, was just in it to line their pockets. Now, one of those few people who actually stood out for the better in his cabinet was Herbert Hoover, who Warren G. Harding selected to be his Secretary of Commerce. And he did such a great job that even after Warren G. Harding died and all the cabinet members who were taking bribes had been removed, Calvin Coolidge, who had been Warren G. Harding's vice president, kept him on board as Secretary of Commerce. And he was the Secretary of Commerce. Take the drinking game for that one. Every time I say Secretary of Commerce, during the Roaring 20s. So this is the guy in charge of businesses when business is booming.
Business is good.
Fair warning, it's not going to last.
No.
We've already hinted at why.
It never does.
So he was like one of the most beloved politicians in the country during the 20s, because it's like, you're enjoying the jazz age? Thank you, Secretary of Commerce. Take a drink. Actually, you can't take a drink because prohibition is happening right now, folks. There's a lot I love about this guy. And one thing I do not like about Herbert Hoover is he was very pro-prohibition.
Yeah.
I know. You can't. The thing is, he's like James Bond without the martini.
Yeah. He's a Quaker, right?
He was a Quaker, so
that makes sense.
Yeah, he's not a fan of drinking, but there was plenty of speakeasies in the 20s.
There were.
Fine.
Like, he probably, like, he didn't need to, you know, have a couple drinks to have a time of full adventures. He'd go over and fight in Chinese rebellions and, you know, like be a gold miner, and I don't know. He was just like,
the dude was not lacking for fun times.
Yeah.
So as the economy is booming and everyone is thanking their Secretary of Commerce, he also, again, he became famous because of his humanitarian efforts, not because he was a rich mining engineer, but because he was using that money to save the world. So in 1927, the Mississippi River flooded and levees broke. This is a precursor to the Hurricane Katrina tragedy. So it was this major humanitarian crisis in America where people all along the Mississippi River were being flooded. Hundreds of people died. So Herbert Hoover took charge of the humanitarian relief there and got a lot of people out of the rough situation. And again, he was once again declared an American hero. He's just the coolest. So it just made sense. The Republicans in 1928 were like, who's the most popular person in the country right now who's not Al Jolson? And I was like, okay, you know what? Herbert Hoover. I think that's a nice fit. Interestingly enough, I found out Calvin Coolidge, the president, to his Secretary of Commerce, take a drink, was actually not a big fan of him, which is weird because he kept him on board for all 4 years and even carried him over from his buddy Warren G. Harding, but said that, for the last 6 years, he's been giving me advice and it's all been bad.
Is it a thing where, like, let's say there's a bunch of corrupt people and then you're just not a corrupt person, you just do your job, and so everyone else gets fired, and they're like, oh, he doesn't have any active felony warrants out for his arrest, maybe we'll give him a promotion.
You're the best of the last men standing.
Yeah.
So in 1928, he got the Republican nomination for president, and his big campaign promises were that he was pushing for lower taxes, reduction in farm subsidies, and to continue that very popular trend of prohibition.
Boo.
I know, what a party pooper. So in his acceptance speech for the nomination, he announced, not that this won't come back to haunt him, "We in America today are nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land." Guys, this is why you don't make grand declarations, because if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
I feel like this is kind of on him.
I know. This is like calling the Titanic unsinkable, folks. It's just like, you just know that quote's going to come back to haunt you.
See, this
Here's
is
what you do. You say the Titanic could sink. So in the 1928 election, they defeated overwhelmingly New York Governor Al Smith. Actually, speaking of Catholics, that's kind of funny that you should bring that up. Your Catholicism.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why Herbert Hoover won is to landslide, in addition to the fact that the guy was James Bond of Washington, D.C. already, Al Smith was Catholic, and there was a strong anti-Catholic sentiment. There's still, let's be honest, there still is an anti-Catholic sentiment. Sure. We just elected our second ever Catholic president last year, and Al Smith, in addition to the fact that he was running on a "Hi, I'm Catholic. I promise the Vatican's not going to run the country," which is the feeling at the time. JFK was a very controversial president because there was a worry that the Vatican would run the country.
Yeah, definitely.
He also campaigned on a pledge to overthrow prohibition, which, by the way, would probably get my vote.
I mean, yeah. It's funny how things kind of repeat themselves a lot of the time, because like the prohibition on marijuana is not going to have like a giant sort of like blanket, the party's now, but it's like, it feels like a piece at a time. They're slowly like repealing things and stuff. And one day I imagine you'll be able to buy like a pack of joints like you do a pack of Marlboro Lights at the gas station if you're like 25 or something.
So what it is interesting, because I was reading about the anti-Catholic thing costing out, possibly contributing to Al Smith's losing the election.
I mean, probably.
Well, we talk about prejudice, but one man that I'm extremely fascinated with right now is Herbert Hoover's running mate, Charles Curtis. Now, every article I read about him basically started with the same thing. Every recent article I've read about him, which is, while it's worth celebrating the fact that, Kamala Harris is our first female vice president, she's the first black and Asian vice president we've ever had. She is not the first vice president of color we've ever had. And that title belongs to Charles Curtis, a man that I'd never heard about until last year.
Like, the name kind of sounds familiar.
It's a super white name. By the way, again, it's notable our first vice president of color had the most like Anglo-Saxon sounding name ever. His father was white and his mother belonged to the Kaw tribe, and the namesake for the state Kansas, of which Charles Curtis was a senator from. Senate Majority Leader, by the way. This guy was vice president, Senate Majority Leader, and he was half indigenous.
Sure.
How did that get forgotten in history? I learned that Christopher Columbus was on his expedition to make sure the world was round, and yet we never learned that we had an indigenous vice president and Senate Majority Leader.
Yeah, that feels like now, like it would be like the biggest deal in the world.
Why isn't this taught? I mean, I've never seen a single BuzzFeed article where it's like, hey, remember the time we elected an indigenous person to vice president?
You would think it would come up in conversation, like.
Well, what I love about Charles Curtis, I'm not trying to make this a soapbox, is so a little bit more about him is his mother was a member of the Kaw tribe, and the full name is, I'm going to butcher this. If anyone wants to correct me, you're welcome to it. Kanza is the namesake for the state of Kansas.
Okay.
So if anyone's going to represent the state of Kansas, it's someone who's from the tribe with the namesake comes from.
Makes sense.
And also interesting guy. Again, it's a shame that his vice presidency was attached to a presidency that most people try to kind of bury. But obviously, the country was pretty dang excited to have the coolest man in history to be the president, especially when he was running on a campaign of everything's great and it always will be, and poor people aren't going to exist ever again. 8 months into his presidency, Black Tuesday happens.
Oh no.
Oh yeah.
What's Black Tuesday, Pete?
Black Tuesday was the day the stock market crashed and everything went to shit.
Mm-hmm. So, and like this isn't like just any crash. This is the sort of crash where like people were like taking that 1, 2, 3 step out of the 80-story window in like the New York Stock Exchange. Like
24% of America was unemployed during the Great Depression.
Yeah,
I need to research this a little bit better, but from what I read on one source, half of all banks in America closed.
Yeah,
and things weren't looking great. Now, again, we've discussed this on our show, but what exactly is the role of the president? And unfortunately, one of the roles of the president, well, unfortunately and fortunately, because, if things are going great, you seem great, is that you're the face of the operation.
Yeah.
So essentially, you're the CEO of America. So despite his best efforts, and again, Herbert Hoover is remembered as the do-nothing president while the economy sank. But really, he just inherited this. Again, this was 8 months into his presidency. If anything, Calvin Coolidge deserves the dreaded title. And Calvin Coolidge doesn't remember for anything. He will probably wind up on our show, by the way.
It's just like Coolidge skating by.
Silent Cal.
Silent Cal.
Silent Cal was silent on purpose because Herbert Hoover was speaking up and he got the blame.
Is it kind of like how the Austrians are like, yeah, Hitler was totally German?
Oh, yeah. I mean, does anyone want like you find the biggest target and you're like, okay, just point at him, throw darts at him.
Yeah, no one hates the Austrians. It's the best PR campaign in the world.
They're like, yeah, we have Mozart
and
Arnold Schwarzenegger, so that is good.
Exactly.
This is apparently what I think Austrians sound like. We have Christoph Waltz. You liked Inglourious Bastards. He was only pretend Nazi.
Although, speaking of Schwarzenegger, and we're way off topic here, but screw it, it's our show. He was talking about, I heard him talking about the rise of fascism and everything. And he's like, listen, when I was a boy, I heard men who got swept up in Hitler, right? Because he's Austrian and Hitler was Austrian. And if you guys listening ever want to hear a really good firsthand account of someone that understands what fascism is and knows what it looks like and has seen the price and ramifications of failure in that regard, listen to Arnold Schwarzenegger talk about his uncles and the people that worked for the Nazis during the war. But we're way off topic. Please.
No, actually, we aren't, Derwin. You unintentionally kind of got us back on target, by the way, because we were off topic a bit. I mean, so
I love it. This is when I fail upwards.
Exactly. So, I mean, what else is happening in the late 20s, early 30s around the world is, the rise of fascism, the rise of the Nazi parties, like that. So again, that's sort of like that's trouble brewing ahead. Yeah. But right now, we're dealing with the depression. And it's also worth noting the stock market crashing in America did not just destroy our economy. It was a global effect, because if America can't buy any like imports, like other countries are going to suffer, and we can't create more imports. We can't export them and make money. So people were suffering worldwide.
Yeah.
And Herbert Hoover was getting the blame from everyone, despite some serious efforts. Now, we talked about the dam.
Mm-hmm.
So he did take some charge on public works projects. Now, if Herbert Hoover is condemned for anything, it's the fact that he did take an approach of, I don't think this is the federal government's job. He believed that states and personal charities should take the lead on this, which turned out to be kind of a mistake. Yeah, again, if it's the whole damn country, it's going to take more than a dam to stop that flood.
See, I am always hesitant when I'm, like, for me, like, looking back at this guy, like, he got handed the greatest economic crisis in modern history anyway. And I can look back at his decisions and say, oh, he shouldn't have. But then I'm like,
we have hindsight.
We have a century of hindsight. And, I can't, the safest, most powerful hands are your own. Right. Now, granted, if everything's falling apart, well, maybe there's a more organized general effort that's
Maybe all
needed.
hands on deck.
A little bit, yeah. But then that's the great part of history is you can look at Hoover. He's like, listen, man, yes, there's problems, but, it's state and local. And, we have a federalist system set up by the founding fathers for a reason. And you can look back at that and say, oh, that didn't work. Maybe we don't try that.
So I'm not going to judge the guy. He's been judged so harshly by millions of people, millions of historians.
Yeah.
So we're going to go easy on our buddy Herbert here.
Yeah.
But he did create the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which loaned hundreds of millions of dollars to banks and railroad companies.
Hey, that's not nothing.
Yeah. So a mix of that plus the public works projects that he was creating to create jobs. He was trying his best. The problem is, as you pointed out, we'd never seen an economic crisis like this. So it kind of takes a Superman plus about a decade of work in order to pull people out. And unfortunately, Herbert Hoover, who is, Indiana Jones, is not Superman.
Yeah.
So there's more. All right. So obviously, poor Herbert was a one-term president. And what really sealed the deal for him was an unfortunate incident in 1932. So I learned about something called the Bonus Army. All right. So a bunch of World War I veterans who were, in addition to the fact that they were veterans, they were protesting the fact that they had not received the promised bonus and they wanted it in advance.
Yeah.
Because they were all broke. The Great Depression,
everybody was
starving.
Everybody was starving. Yeah.
So a bunch of these World War veterans set up camps to protest in Washington, D.C. so they could get those bonuses early. Because originally, I think it was like decades after the fact, they'd get a bonus for fighting World War I. They're like, hey, can we get an advance on that?
Yeah.
So they set up camps, and Herbert Hoover got General MacArthur, and not the General MacArthur we talked about in the Taft episode. I mean, his son, Douglas MacArthur, the one that you've heard of, to evict them. And unfortunately, it got out of hand, and it turned into something of a crisis where veterans were fighting back against the police that were trying to kick him out, and some of the veterans got killed.
That's not a good look.
It is not a good look. Like, folks, everyone listening, if you want to run for public office, don't mess with the troops. Like, we are just kind of beloved. And so if you have a Kent State incident that involves service members and veterans of the biggest war the world had seen at that point, he ain't going to win the popular vote. And he did not. As you brought up at the start of the episode, way to spoil it, bro. In 1932, he overwhelmingly lost to FDR, who went on to become one of our most beloved presidents of all time. And FDR's approach to the Great Depression was to create the New Deal, something that Herbert Hoover spoke out against for the rest of his life. But it's worth noting, and you talked about World War II. So Herbert Hoover left Washington, D.C. in shame, one of the most hated men in the country, a complete 180 from what he'd been before entering office.
That sucks.
There's a happy ending to it, happy-ish. Let's be honest, the happy ending would have been if everyone said, we forgive you. You unfortunately got the blame, and you and Lou get your own Mount Rushmore in Iowa. But he still was an extremely respected man. He continued to write books throughout his post-president life. And he was still, like during World War II, he was still reached out as an advisor on humanitarian efforts because, like, the dude saved millions of lives. It's like, can you do it again? Because basically it's the sequel.
It's the sequel.
We got to bring you back. And he was hired as an advisor for both President Truman, a Democrat, and President Eisenhower, a Republican. So when push comes to shove, y'all, partisanship is stupid. Find the best person for the job.
It is very stupid.
Oh, did I mention that while Herbert Hoover was president, expenditures for American Indian School and healthcare doubled from the administration of President Coolidge?
Yeah.
Okay, having a Native American vice president probably helped. I mean, because it was like, hey, how was public school for you in the Kaw Reservation? Oh, it was terrible. Oh, we could maybe change that. We had the power.
Like, maybe he should have just been like a humanitarian dude. Like,
I mean, well, it's worth noting because we've touched upon this with other presidents we've talked about who've had the most interesting lives.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if Herbert Hoover had continued to be a wildly successful mining engineer around the world, raising millions of dollars to help people out, we wouldn't remember his name. I mean, maybe. I mean, there might be like buildings named after him, a few statues named after him, but really it's being president that solidified his place in history.
That's true.
And that's what what's interesting, Taft had one of the most accomplished lives in American history.
Sure.
And he's the fat president who got stuck in a bathtub.
Oh,
so again, it's that the years you spend in the White House that define you. And that's kind of a pity.
Like, I really want the AMC 5-season series called Hoover. Like, or Herbert. I don't know. Herbert has more of like a comedy feel to it, but Hoover.
Yeah. I think you could get an interesting miniseries. Get Leonardo DiCaprio on board. I feel like he'd do a good job.
Yeah. Oh, he just
always could play Lou. Oh, we get Amy Adams and Leonardo DiCaprio. Bam! If this happens, I want a cut of that pay.
Yeah, there you go. I just want to just watch it and be entertained. Right? I'm a simple creature.
I mean, so that and by the way, we should probably mention that he died. He lived to be 90. He had one of the longest retirements of any president. Continued kicking all the way until 90 because the guy was, awesome.
Sounds like.
Continued advising, was friends with presidents all the way up until Richard Nixon. Continued advising in D.C. Continued writing books. Continued probably looking at rocks and telling you how old they are.
Yeah.
Up until 20 October 1964.
Wow.
Wow. We got Owen Wilson here, folks.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. Wow.
So that is the story of a poor Quaker boy, the son of a blacksmith, who mined for gold, found some, and then wound up stuck on Black Tuesday.
What a life.
All right. So one last bit of trivia. Now, the same way that every president, no matter how obscure and uneventful they seem, they made a change in the world. Herbert Hoover's legacy could easily be that he is the president who signed into law that the Star-Spangled Banner is our national anthem.
That's a big deal. I mean, not as big a deal as the Great Depression, but that's kind of a big deal.
Well, I mean, the Great Depression only lasted for about a decade, whereas the Star-Spangled Banner is still sung at every sporting event.
That's true.
If it weren't for COVID stopping all sporting events for a while.
Yeah.
So that's Herbert Hoover, our 31st president. Now we get to the questions.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Derwin, do you think that Herbert Hoover, this is such a redundant question, deserves to be remembered more fondly?
Yes. I want a mini series of this guy, and then I want to know more about his wife, and I want to know about the vice president.
Charles Curtis.
Dude. Yes, that dude. And like, I want his whole life on TV, from like, I'm a poor Quaker boy and alcohol's bad, to we're fighting the Boxer Rebellion, and then my wife's a nurse, but she's good with a gun. Shoot the man. Bam. Like, I'm enthralled. And then I want to see the climax of this guy's story is I'm the president now and everything's falling apart. The guy has done nothing but awesome up until this point, and he drops the ball, right? He's awesome.
I would say the ball was dropped on him.
I mean, yeah, but like, you would think the precedent of how awesome this guy has been up to this point, and then it's like, it's all building to this, and then he's like, it just doesn't work. Like, he just drops it's so surprising because he's been so consistently awesome up to the Depression. The lesson to be learned from pretty much every episode we've done so far is that being president sucks. It sucks.
Like, it is not a good job, and it is like there is a select few who get to shine in the Oval Office, and a lot who just get smudged.
Imagine being president now.
You can blame for everything that goes wrong, and occasionally you get credit when things go right.
Well, like, I remember people were giving Obama grief because he ate his cheeseburger with a fork and the knife.
What a freak.
And then Trump, they gave him grief because he had kids over at the White House for ice cream, and he had 2 scoops, and then everyone else got 1. And I'm like, these guys have the nuclear codes. If they want to eat 2 scoops of ice cream, or the dude wants to eat his cheeseburger with a fork and the knife, leave him alone.
Yeah, all right. You're under the sharpest microscope. So, I'm not going to give any president too much flack unless they're Warren G. Harding, because that was fun. Also, Zachary Taylor owned slaves, so
Yeah. Okay, if you own slaves,
that's objectively bad.
Yeah, but like it's just
if the number of slaves you own is more than 0 and he had over 100,
yeah.
you kind of deserve to poop yourself to death in the White House. So on to our next very important historical question. In honor of Warren G. Harding nicknaming his penis Jerry, what do you think our 31st president should have nicknamed his penis if he did it all?
Made for suction.
I love it. All right. Mine would be the Hoover ham. The guy had big dick energy, so I don't think Lou was complaining too much.
Yeah.
All right. And our last question. If there were a zombie apocalypse, again, this is so redundant. If there were a zombie apocalypse, would you want Herbert Hoover fighting alongside you?
And Lou. And the vice president. Like, I want the whole team. Like
the whole cabinet involved.
Yeah, let's do it, man.
I mean, as long as there's not like economic issues at stake, if the zombies are going around like destroying the stock market, then I'd be like, you know what? I'm going to wait for FDR. Yeah, I know he's in a wheelchair, but you know what? I'm just gonna wait for him. But if it's zombies, I mean, dude, Herbert Hoover, let's get all boxer revolution on this.
Let's put Herbert out in the front line, and then we're gonna he's gonna lead the charge, and him and Lou are gonna just take the hill, and then it's. I feel like they would stop things before they get too bad. The zombie apocalypse, not an economic catastrophe.
Dude, if only it had been a zombie apocalypse instead of a Great Depression,
he would have been on top of it. We'd love
this guy. He'd be on Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. I wish that Herbert Hoover was the main character of The Walking Dead instead of Rick Grimes, because him and Lou is a much better duo than Rick and Lori. Because
Lori's the worst.
I mean,
and they even called her the first lady in the second season.
Yeah,
she did not deserve to have that role. That is besmirching the good memory of Lou Henry Hoover. I was gonna say, I think in terms of, I'm not sure how we're ranking the presidents we've covered so far, but I want to give Lou, like she's my favorite first lady we've covered so far. And by the way, that is not an insult to Nellie Taft, who was also kind of a badass.
But I mean,
she was a classy badass.
She was a classy badass. Lou was saving lives in more ways than she was a nurse.
She's a science nerd.
She's a science nerd. She's a globe-trotting lady. She married Indiana Jones during the Boxer Rebellion.
Spoke 8 languages.
At
a time when women weren't even supposed to be educated. She was at Stanford, the first class.
They weren't even allowed to speak half the time. And she's speaking 8 languages.
8 languages, bitches. Yeah.
And then I have this image in my head, and maybe I'm just way over romanticizing it, but of they're under attack, and then she's saving people, but there's a guy, shoot him, but bam, bam, they go back to saving people and stuff. It's all very theatrical in my head. I want to see this movie so bad.
So in case you were wondering, Derwin and I think that Lou Hoover is better than Lori from The Walking Dead. I want that on our record.
Yes.
All right. Well, that feels like a great place to wrap things up. So Derwin, any last thoughts on Herbert Hoover?
I think he should be more remembered than what he is. Right? He should be remembered. There's so much more to him.
Read up on the guy, folks. Just read up on the guy. Read up on the gal. Read up on Charles Curtis.
Yeah.
Read up about everything that happened to this guy before and after the Oval Office, and then do a quick blurb on the White House part.
Yeah, he should be remembered for so much more than just Hoovervilles.
Right? Hooverville. We barely even mentioned the fact that shanty towns are nicknamed after him.
Yeah.
That's a pity.
A shanty town is where you find trash, you nail it together, you sleep under it, right? And they called them Hoovervilles. And apparently that would be like calling them Indiana Jonesvilles.
So my closing thought, Herbert Hoover did a damn thing for this country and the world at large.
20 million people.
Yeah. All right. So for the Dead President Society podcast, that has been our latest episode. Make sure to tune in for the next one. And that, folks, is how the tombstone crumbles.
Yeah. Wait, what's my sign off again? I forget. Can that be my sign off? What's my sign off?
It's mine.
No, fuck it. That's my sign off. We're leaving that. I'll see you next week, Pete.
See you next week. All right.
Oh, how do I end this?